Right, look, welcome everyone. I hope you are all well, and I really appreciate that you're joining us rather than Dominic Cummings, which obviously will pay off because this session is going to be so much more exciting. My name is Axel Hedmiller. I'm the director of Discover Now. And Discover Now is one of 7 HDR UK hubs. Discover Now focuses on real-world evidence, and you will learn all about the hub in the next hour and a half. We have a fairly packed agenda with some very exciting speakers ranging from the NHS, academia, industry, and also our patients that have joined us today. And again, that's very timely if you have seen some of the coverage in the FT today about data sharing and so on. So this is a big theme for us, and hence I'm very delighted that we're going to talk about this today as well. Just a bit of housekeeping before we kick off. So you will have seen that the meeting is being recorded. If you're not happy with that in any form or shape, then I'm afraid I have to ask you to leave the meeting, because we want to make this material available to others who can't be with us. Today, we going to run through quite a tight agenda. I will try to leave space for questions, maybe 1 or 2 after each of the speakers, but there will be a relatively substantial Q&A at the end of the meeting, which hopefully gives you an opportunity to ask questions. Otherwise, put them in the chat as we go along. We may not be able to respond to all of them right now, but we will certainly get in touch, or you can get in touch with us if we haven't managed to answer them all. And as usual, you all have been on these calls many times before. Please put yourself on mute if you're not speaking, because this is very much run as a meeting rather than as a sort of webinar, so we can see you all and we can hear you all in the audience. So please make sure you're on mute so that you're not disturbing the speakers. The objective, as I said, is very much to expose what this hub has done over the last 18 months. I can't believe it's been 18 months. It feels like we have just started a few months ago, really, but it's been 18 months, and great things have already happened with Discover Now, and it's building on a sort of long history of data work in North West London as well. And Amanda Lucas, who's the operations director for the hub, will talk us through the history and the objectives of the hub in just a moment. So that's really all I wanted to say up front. Hopefully you enjoy the next hour and a half. As I say, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And with that, Amanda, over to you for the first bit of our session.
Thank you very much, Axel, and I hope you all can hear me. So I'm Amanda Lucas. I'm a director with Imperial College Health Partners, but also the operations lead for Discover Now. It's been an exciting and frenetic year. Like many of the hubs, we got distracted by COVID, but let me tell you a little bit about our journey so far. Next slide, please, Andrew. So, as Axel said, we are the hub for real-world evidence. Whilst many of the other hubs focus on specific disease areas, we have access to a very rich linked longitudinal data set, which is actually one of the largest in Europe, which is available in de-identified form for research purposes. And we use that to support any type of research in real-world evidence. We're not specific to any one disease area. We have a really exciting collaboration of partners, which you'll see listed on the bottom of this slide, which has really enriched what we've been able to do in the last 18 months, and also forms a key part of our plans as we progress for the next 18 months. So we have significant investment and partnership with IBM and Google. So IBM, as I'll talk about later, are developing our trusted research environment to host the data sets we have access to in North West London. We have industry relationships with AstraZeneca, Janssen and Novartis. And in fact, we've got Ross here today from AstraZeneca to talk to you about some of the work that AstraZeneca has been doing around diabetes and heart failure. We've also got really great collaborations with Northwest eHealth. We've got Martin here as well. So I'm doing pitches for the lightning talks here, who have great experience of using real world data within clinical trials and research settings. And we've very much utilised some of that expertise and technology as part of the work of the hub so far. One London, Genomics England, Humour and Dr. Foster as well as the NHS, of course, in North West London and Imperial College. A really key point to note, as Axel said, is we have a lot of history in North West London of using and accessing data. And North West London as a sector invested in pulling together this linked data set over the last number of years for direct care. And we've managed to use it also now in a trusted, safe way for research. And having the ability to have the data being used for direct care and research and planning is really valuable, which means that any data improvement to the direct care data can feed directly into the de-identified data, which enriches the value of the data that we can do. The Hub also has access to, as I say, sort of leading tools and technologies. And also we have access to a set of expert analysts and data scientists, economists who can help support access to the data and user data resources and collaborations. Next slide, please. So I'm just to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the last 18 months with some of the investments that we've had. So data curation was a key part of the ambition for the Hub, and we have spent a lot of time investing in the quality of the data and also improving the data by linking it with other data sets. Like many other hubs, we've had to pivot to support our sector and their COVID efforts, and that was actually provided an opportunity for us in North West London, in that we managed to bring in daily pathology data feeds as we were trying to get COVID test results. We also now have vaccination status of patients within our data set. And having this value, as I say, to use the data for real world clinical use and population health actually is enabling us to enrich and improve the quality of the data in de-identified form for research purposes. We've also managed to bring in pollution data, which is very topical and helpful. So we now have pollution data linked at a postcode level linked to an individual patient, which again is very useful, hopefully, for future research opportunities. And also we have access to the Greater Manchester data set through the Farsight tool, which Martin will tell you a little bit about later. So we have access to the 2.6 million population of data set in North West London and over nearly 1.5 million population in Greater Manchester. We also have a fantastic consent to contact register that we've invested in and accelerated its uptake through digital channels. And this is a really important channel for us to engage patients, to let patients have a choice about being involved in research. Farsight, I'll leave Martin to talk about, but we've now implemented Farsight in North West London. It's now available as an asset, and we're looking really for more use cases to demonstrate the value of this tool to the Hub and to our patients in primary care in North West London. As I say, we have invested in a trusted research environment with our technology partner, IBM. We are planning to build, through that environment, a high-performance analytics platform that can host the linked longitudinal data that I described, and also ensure that we offer safe, secure access to that to researchers from any background who have a legitimate reason to access that data. And Amy will talk about some of the conditions that have been put in place through some of the citizen advisory groups and public engagement that we've done to help ensure that we are setting this environment up in a safe and secure way that meets public expectation. We've really also invested in a number of data use case exemplars, primarily initially around diabetes. And again, Ross will talk you through some of the health transformation work that we've done. But we've been able to demonstrate the use of the real world data to inform, measure and enable and evaluate digital interventions in the healthcare sector in North West London. Interesting, that's spun out now, it's looking at different areas like heart failure and CKD. Implementation and sustainability is absolutely fundamental to the Hub ambitions, the HDR UK ambition. And we've spent a lot of work thinking about how we can build a business plan and a commercial model and a pricing model that works both for our system in North West London, but also for researchers and organisations wishing to access and use that data. And also the real value of what we bring, as I say, is that we are very much embedded in this ecosystem in North West London, so we can really truly test innovations and interventions in the real world setting with the real world healthcare system. Next slide, please. Okay, as I say, we bring together this really exciting ecosystem in North West London, and it's recognizing that actually by having the data is not just good enough, actually having data and also access to healthcare and access to an intelligence that we can derive through working with clever researchers at the college and within the NHS, people understand their patients and the patient pathways is really vital. And actually bringing together also then the industry partners and the third sector, it could be charity partners, it could be other funders who want to work with us, that unique ecosystem that we can connect through the data is actually what we believe to be quite a big part of our unique selling point as a hub. which links very well into all the work that's happening in healthcare at the moment to look at digital technology post-COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. So in summary, before I hand over back to Axel to take us through the lightning talks, this is our developing service offer. As I say, it's not enough, I don't believe, just to have access to data. Actually understanding what you do with that data and how you can make that data useful is vitally important. So we provide a range of service throughout the spectrum of innovation and research, from a very simple study design and feasibility questions through to retrospective research questions that look back to really understand how a cohort of patients interact with health and care. We are able to run evaluations, economic modelling to really understand the impact of certain interventions that have been applied to a healthcare system. And with the implementation of Farsight and also with testing out some of the work we've done with diabetes and heart failure, we're really able to recruit patients into research studies and then monitor these digital solutions in real time with real world data within our trusted research environment. So just to say, in terms of the impact that we've had to date, we have over 80 projects underway at the moment through Discover Now. So we are very much live, operational, and in a sort of mature service setting. We're very much keen in the next 18 months to refine and develop and mature that service offer. We believe actually this year we'll continue to do a lot of work around retrospective research and evaluations. And also we think there's a great opportunity around AI capability and machine learning, which is something that we're looking to develop as a capability and offer in the next 12 months. We've offered studies to a range of disease conditions, largely sort of long-term conditions, but also we've done studies around cancer and COVID, and Samantha will talk to you through some of the work we've done, in particular around mental health, which also has proved very useful to understand through having that linked primary and secondary care data. I think I'll pause there. Very happy to take any questions, and I'll hand back to Axel.
Thank you, Amanda. And hopefully this has given colleagues on the call a good overview of what the hub is, where it has come from, and what the objectives are. But Amanda is with us, obviously, for the rest of the time. So please pop your questions in the chat if there are specific things that you want to know about the hub or how it works. So we now have a series of lightning talks, as Amanda said. So these are very short, sharp contributions from a range of colleagues that we have been working with, including our patients. And without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to the first one. Martin Gibson is the CEO of Northwest Health, eHealth, and has been working in the Manchester area for some time on big linked longitudinal data, and that was the reason why we have been partnering with Martin. So Martin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Axel. Great to talk to you all this afternoon. I have to say, next slide, please. We are in Northwest eHealth. We are really super excited about working with the hub, because it allows us to do what we want to do with data with our technology tools on top of your fantastically curated data that you spent a lot of time putting together. Next slide, please. So from our point of view, and from the point of view of the life sciences industry, we have a big problem, which is the one we're all trying to solve, in that the way that we do traditional trials is very slow, it's very inefficient, and it's really massively expensive. The average amount of money it now costs to bring a new drug to market is about $2.6 billion. And our trial programs, 80% of trials often fail to recruit. They don't retain sufficient patients. 2/3 of sites don't recruit to target. 30% of patients drop out. And we spend 30% of the money on a trial on auditing stuff from bits of paper or electronic records into the electronic case report forms. Next slide, please. So we as a technology company have been trying to unpick all of that, and we've developed two main suites of software systems to do it. The first one is called Farsight, which is actually an acronym, and it stands for Feasibility and Recruitment System to Improve Trial Efficiency. And this allows us to design trials so that we're confident that the patients actually exist, so that when we want to do the recruitment, it works and we get the numbers of people we need for the study. It allows us to find the right sites to do the trials in, we know that the sites have the people that we want, and then it's got a switch over, which I'll show you a screenshot of in a minute, that allows those sites and those particular, in this case, GPs, to identify the patients themselves, and the system then helps to recruit or offer them a trial if they're interested. The second suite, which I'm not going to talk about too much, is Connexon, and that is about bringing all the data together from different data sources actually to run trials. The first iteration of this was a few years back when we did something called the Salford Lung Study with GSK, but there are now several versions on, and this brings all the data together in real time and gets rid of those audit issues because the data are directly from source. We're hoping that we'll be able to use that in anger in the Discover Now Hub in the future, but for now it's Farsight. Next slide, please. So here's just a few screenshots of Farsight, and rather than reading the writing down the left-hand side, if you just focus on the middle panel, which says Northwest eHealth Researcher View, this allows you to look at inclusion, exclusion criteria, the top two boxes, and some demographics. It's designed for everyday clinical researchers to use. You do not have to be a computer scientist to use this. You just use natural language. In this case, if I want to search for people with diabetes, I just search for the term diabetes. You can see at the top right, once I'm happy with my search, it will show me all the different primary care sites, and actually it will detail how many people each of them have if I wish to recruit from or choose those sites to recruit from. Once all the various permissions are in place, we can send a link through to those GPs so they can actually individually re-identify the patients, and the system helps them to do that. That's obviously dummy data at the bottom because that will be identifiable. All the writing down the left-hand side tells you that whilst that looks very simple, it's actually very complicated and requires you to map all the different data, to get all the right permissions in place, to make sure that the system is safe and compliant with all the regulations. But that's what we've done, and we've now rolled this out across Northwest London, as Amanda was saying. So if we look at the next slide, here's a very quick example showing you a search looking for people with asthma and the inclusion criteria at the top, some demographics at the bottom. This search, I think, from recollection, took about 2 seconds to run. So it searched 1 million people and found 81,000. And you can see down the left-hand side the different clinical commissioning groups that have been included in that search. So it's just a sneak preview, which is an exciting thing that you've actually got this available to use now. Next slide. So what I've talked about really so far is for the pharmaceutical industry, for drug development. But of course, the technology that we have here also works for many other things. So like diagnostics or medical devices. And working with Discover Now, we were the first group outside of the US to become a collaborative member of the FDA and medical device industry consortium initiative called NEST-CC. This happened in 2020. There was then a pandemic. There still is a pandemic. So things have just paused a little, but we're now starting this back up. And we hope very much that we'll be able to use real world data to be outreach for this US-based system and be able to evaluate devices much more efficiently across Northwest London as well. Finally, final slide. I think you can see that we've already got a successful partnership. We have demonstrable outputs, which is fantastic. We have a tool that now allows us to recruit in a primary care setting. The data that we have allows us to model what we have. We can link the data. You have longitudinal patient data from your existing electronic records, and that's advancing all the time, as Amanda said. And what that means is that we can eventually use these data to run trials with that Connexon platform that I mentioned earlier. And all of this will improve our success rates. And that means that ultimately we'll become the go-to place here in the UK to be able to do these kinds of new research, virtualized trials, and everything else that you hear everybody talk about at the moment. So we are at the forefront of these developments, and I'm very grateful to the Discover Now Hub for the opportunity to work with them. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Martin, and also for sticking to the time so well. We're doing brilliantly on time, which is great. So the next speaker is Ross Stone, and he works for the AstraZeneca team, who has partnered with us as well. But I should also say AstraZeneca has been a fantastic contributor and partner over the last 12 months, much more widely than just the data in combating the pandemic, not just in Office London, but across the country. So we're very pleased that Ross can be with us today. So Ross, over to you.
Thank you very much, Axel, and thank you very much, everybody. Yes, I'm Ross Stone. I'm a global program director in the two digital health teams, I suppose, at AstraZeneca, and we've been working with Discover Now for the last 18 months or so in a few different areas, as Axel pointed out. Heart failure, type 2 diabetes, a key kind of pathway transformation focus is for us. We're hoping to also start work in CKD, and we've also sort of played our role in COVID-19 virtual wards as well. So looking forward to telling you a little bit today about our work in diabetes. So I can take the next slide, please. So healthcare pathway transformation, a sort of quick definition as we see it, and hopefully this aligns with many of you on the call. We're effectively engaged in designing better healthcare experiences for patients and HCPs. And what is the purpose of that? Well, clearly to achieve better patient outcomes. How do we do it? Well, we actually set about trying to align the underlying healthcare system, which is the underpinnings of people, process, and technology, in enabling more efficient patient pathways, and therefore hopefully patient outcomes as a result of that. And how do we do that? Well, in order to do that, we kind of therefore deliver more efficient, personalized, participatory, and sort of predictive, ultimately, care enabled by data and technology. So we'll look at type 2 diabetes in that context now. And next slide, please. A note on what pathway transformation tries to do. I think this kind of slightly familiar change management style slide probably helps bring a bit of clarity to this. I think for those of us who've worked very closely in the NHS and with health systems in general, we see the way in which these organisations are structured, and that policy and leadership from the top down have an incredibly strong role to play in science-led clinical practice change, policies and guidelines and so forth. But there's also a gap that we identify, which is from the ground up, or the bottom up, where we start to look and unpick the silos and the culture and the data systems and the fragmentation that actually the health system works with, in and around on a day-to-day basis, and how that affects the experience of patients as they move through a pathway in the health system, and how healthcare practitioners are able to do their job. And, you know, as we know, a number of workarounds are often employed and challenges to overcome in clinical practice every day. And as part of Discover Now and HDR UK's wider remit of trying to use health data and technology enablement to try to sort of solve some of these problems. So we really see pathway transformation as accelerating clinical practice change improvements by making sort of actionable and sustainable changes from the bottom up. Next slide, please. So why do AZ partner with Discover Now? There are a number of reasons for this. I think it's probably an obvious point to point out that, you know, we've identified a real readiness for an innovation partnership with Discover Now in Northwest London. Their database is very key to the ability for us to sort of get started and where to begin and quantifying a problem and understanding the size of patient populations and cohorts and where we kind of make a difference. We're able to work with best-in-class academics through the Imperial College, the likes of Professor Coach Ray, who's the PI on our Imperial College study that's helping evaluate the transformation changes that we're making in type 2 diabetes. It enables us as an access point into the Northwest London NHS system and to be able to sort of bring progressive and forward-thinking advocates in clinicians forward to sort of align our objectives to, in order to sort of like try to make these progressive and data-informed changes, so we can identify shared problems and quantify the size of those, and also sort of relatively match, you know, the challenges in practice and care direct care as a result of the sort of systemic challenges that underpin the way in which care is delivered today, and how we might be able to solve for that. Another good benefit here for us is that, you know, co-located when we could be more regularly, rather than being on calls such as this. But, you know, before the pandemic broke out, we were sort of co-located and sitting shoulder to shoulder and side by side with clinicians, with data analysts, with academics, with healthcare practitioners and so forth, to really sort of create a shared environment and a cross-functional team, which is essential for this kind of work. It also provides safe sort of conditions for experimentation. You know, the nature of this work means that you have to try a lot of things and learn and iterate. So that's perfect. And then service design and clinical protocols and processes. So yeah, a good joining of expertise that lead to good outcomes. Next slide, please. Really quick project snapshot. So in type 2 diabetes, what have we done? So diabetes care in Northwest London costs around £600 million a year for people with type 2 diabetes in their treatment. Patients are only seen once or twice a year in primary care. It's difficult for HCPs to know if their care plans are adhered to during that time. We also know that about 538 million of those costs are acute care costs. So there's a big problem with patient identification and management and multidisciplinary management in primary care. So we've implemented a new risk stratification model that we've co-developed with a clinical reference group in Northwest London to risk stratify patients in the population better for their risk. And we've deployed and co-designed with clinicians a 12-week intensification of care service using remote patient monitoring, video group consultation, and structured education, including behaviour change content to make better lifestyle and health decisions. And we're evaluating that with Imperial College on a sort of robust protocol, peer academic reviewed study, and that's just going live at the moment with first patient in at the end of this month, up to a cohort of about 300 plus, and it's called Fresh Start. Next slide, please. So, slightly complicated slide, but I'll try to make it simple. On the left-hand side, we start, in simple terms, the service starts with risk stratification of high-risk patients using the risk stratification model that we touched upon earlier. Then this has obviously been informed as well and tested on data that we've been able to use in Discover Now. Patients that are eligible for our service are then onboarded and put into a 12-week intensification service, which is trying to bring patients back into diabetes control, and that's a combination of video group consultations. That is also making use of a remote patient monitoring platform provider called Humour, who's also a member of our hub, and their app enables patients to provide clinical and non-clinical data points via the app and the connected devices that are provided, and they also receive timely emails twice a week to help with sort of personalized content around behavior change and structured education to sort of make better decisions in their health and lifestyle, which have all been clinically kind of written by our stakeholders. Next is a build, next slide. And across this pathway, of course, there's driving guideline directed therapy where appropriate throughout, and all this is being measured in a study. I guess in parallel to that, it's worth mentioning that we're also looking to just scale the adoption of this service in primary care, regardless of the sort of outcomes of the study. It's already getting a lot of traction in primary care in Northwest London, so that's great. Next slide, please. So yes, so in summary, I suppose, Discover Now enables impact in type 2 diabetes in Northwest London in many ways, and I've touched on quite a few of them here, but I think the key ones are risk stratification to identify more patients who are uncontrolled and at risk of complications. It enables us to quantify the size of the problem in the existing pathway and the gaps and opportunities within that pathway highlighted by the data where we might be able to have most impact. So essential for then us to sort of like bring focus with our collaborative groups to where we should put our the bulk of our investment in time and effort into sort of like unblocking those areas and making them more efficient. It enables tailored digital health solutions to support patients. So Humour being part of the hub, as I pointed out, has been hugely helpful, and also in COVID-19 virtual ward remote monitoring patients with COVID, for example. Been a great Discover Now has been great to bring those diagnostics and platforms to the table to work with us. Measurement of proactive pathway improvements. So yeah, we're measuring it in a study, but you're looking at the improvements we've made in the data versus the standard of care today. Allows us to quantify the impact that we're having. And there's also provision for close to real-time clinical management solutions that I've touched on. That's next slide. There might be one more. Or is it? Yeah. Okay. And so just conscious of time, hopefully I've been bought a tiny bit of time from Martin being so efficient before me, but some encouraging provisional results. So we've identified through Discover Now 75,000 high-risk patients with type 2 diabetes who are at risk of complications. That's using the risk stratification criteria that I spoke about earlier. And we've deployed a pilot to test our service. We've had some amazing results so far, just with 80% of daily engagement of users in the service in the first couple of months, which is fantastic. We've seen some very indicative and early indicative average HbA1c reduction based on people using the service. And we've now scaled up to about 20 plus primary care sites who are joining us for the study. So with first patient in at the end of the month. I think that is all from me. Apologies for running over slightly. Look forward to answering any questions.
That's all right. Really interesting, Ross, and hopefully these two presentations from Martin and Ross have sort of given you an impression of how we work with industry partners. But you know, that's very much a sort of two-way relationship. We very much enjoy having these teams around us and holding our feet to the fire and bringing a certain rigor and pace to what we're doing. So we very much enjoy and benefit from these relationships beyond some of the technical, financial and other contributions that partners are making. So the next two presentations are from colleagues who have used the data for research purposes. So the first one is Samantha Schultz, who's a consultant psychiatrist at the West London NHS Trust. And she will tell us about how she has used the data in the area of obesity. Over to you.
Thank you, Axel. So I'm, as Axel said, I'm a psychiatrist. I work in West London NHS Trust, and my clinical work is based in Imperial College NHS Trust, as I work as a consultant psychiatrist for people who are supporting people who are living with obesity, going through the process of bariatric surgery. And the project I'm going to tell you about today was born out of a clinical dilemma or question, which was around people who were also living with serious mental illness seeking bariatric surgery and trying to understand what their healthcare pathway was like both before and after surgery. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little bit of a background as to why this was important, is we know that people living with serious mental illness have far worse rates of obesity than the average population, and partly as a result of that and the comorbidities associated with obesity, die prematurely, so often have 15 years less life expectancy than the average person. And sadly, this tends to affect younger patients more than older patients. So the sort of age group 30 to 35 tends to be the worst affected. There's a range of contributing factors to this, which I won't go into today, but certainly it's fair to say that iatrogenic factors such as medication prescribed is a big contributing factor. So when it comes to thinking about bariatric surgery, we're keen to support people who have a serious mental illness having bariatric surgery, but there is this perception that actually they struggle more after the surgery, and this is where this project was born out of. Next slide, please. So we specifically so my question for a long time has been, is this perception that people living with serious mental illness have more difficulties after bariatric surgery, is that true? And we know that some studies have shown they've got greater complication rates in A&E attendances for people who have serious mental illness after bariatric surgery. But there haven't been any studies that have compared the pre-surgery data and looked at it at a very large group. And within our own service, I knew that looking at the clinical records alone was an onerous task, and also limited me to only just one trust and being able to look at just my own patients. And so the Discover Now data set afforded the opportunity to look over a much wider group of patients, a much wider base, and to be able to look more interestingly across different areas of healthcare. So not just their A&E attendance, for instance, but also how people were presented to GP surgeries, their medication use, and including their mental health care over a period of time. And so we tried to look at this cohort of patients both before and after surgery, and to compare them to people who didn't live with a serious mental illness, and also people who also had common mental disorders such as anxiety and depression, which wouldn't qualify as a serious mental illness, but nonetheless may have effects too. Next slide, please. And one of the outcomes of the study was to show that actually, as other studies have also shown, that people who have serious mental illness do as well in terms of their reduction in their comorbidities and their weight after surgery. So we were able with this study to sort of group these 1,000 patients into different cohorts, either with a serious mental illness, a common mental disorder, or no psychological diagnosis according to their GP records. And that allowed us then to sort of look at their data over a 5-year period before and after surgery. And we found that their HbA1c, which is a measure of diabetes control, was much better after surgery in all the groups. And similarly, their BMI or their weight was also similarly improved after bariatric surgery in all of the groups. And cardiovascular risk and diabetes before and after surgery was improved. We also looked at a range of other outcomes, and all of them were similarly, we saw sort of similar results across the different groups. Next slide, please. But when it came to their healthcare usage, it was really interesting because we definitely did see this finding that there was a higher rate of healthcare usage, particularly non-elective healthcare usage. So A&E attendances or emergency admissions tended to be, or unexpected admissions tended to be higher after in the 2 years after bariatric surgery for the group that had serious mental illness. However, and this is really important, when we looked at the 2 years before surgery, we found that those rates were actually very high before surgery. And so in fact, there wasn't really much difference in the degree of increased A&E use before and after surgery, particularly in the first year, but it did seem to actually tail off after a couple of years. And we found similar results in the non-elective admissions. And interestingly, we were able to look with the sort of advantage of the data set is it allowed us to look in a little bit more granular detail as to why people were attending. And we were able to see that actually the reasons for the presentations were actually very similar. So it was around things like abdominal pain, nausea and vomiting, and so on. Next slide, please. And so the results basically showed us that people with serious mental illness did appear to have equally good outcomes in surgery, in reducing their obesity-related comorbidity, but also that they did have higher total healthcare needs both before and after surgery in A&E admissions, non-elective and elective admissions, GP attendances, and also when we looked in more detail at the prescription rates as well. But that the higher rates of non-elective and emergency healthcare usage appeared to persist in the first 2 years after surgery, but then started to drop off. Now, the numbers are too small to actually really be confident about those results. And I think what we would need next is to sort of repeat this in a year's time when we've got longer follow-up data. And interestingly, we saw a slightly different pattern in the community and GP use, where there seemed to be less use of GP care in the 2 years after surgery. So indicating that people are probably receiving more of the initials aftercare in the outpatient clinic. The results of this data have allowed us to sort of think a little bit clearer about how we support people with serious mental illness having an evidence-based treatment for their obesity, and have challenged some of the stigmatizing beliefs around people with serious mental illness going through bariatric surgery, both in my own team and in others, and in other places that have presented this. And I think it's also allowed us to sort of within our team to start to think about how we might plan our services differently and provide perhaps potentially more support post-operatively to these patients, and think more carefully pre-operatively about how we might plan their care, knowing that they're going to require higher support after surgery. And I don't think we would have been able to get such a granular and in-depth picture of the healthcare usage without being able to look at the healthcare in different aspects and different places, such as primary, secondary, and mental health care, without this particular data set. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And so it's very much a clinical example, as I said, of the use of the data, having linked longitudinal data. And obviously, all these case studies also help us to clean the data, because it's only when we actually start to use the data that we discover where the data lacks granularity or quality. And that's part of the reason why we're sort of almost bootstrapping our way into the data quality issue, because we can't do this in one big bang, which would cost a lot of money and probably not be very targeted. The next example is also a clinical one, focuses on kidney disease, and has been run by Professor Frederick Tam. So Frederick, over to you.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to share with you our collaboration work on the importance of kidney disease, particularly diabetic kidney disease and multimorbidity in the real world situation. And my work is both as an NHS kidney consultant and also do a lot of research in new development of treatment for patients. Next, please. And chronic kidney disease is really a global problem. And diabetic kidney disease is the most common cause of chronic kidney disease in the Western world. And on the picture on the right-hand side, you can see that the contribution of hypertension, high glucose, they cause inflammation and scarring in the kidney. And in some patients, sadly, they will change the shape of normal shaped smooth kidney into a scar kidney with kidney failure. Now, as a kidney specialist, we think we're doing good things for a patient. In fact, we are not. We provide dialysis and transplantation for patients with end-stage kidney disease, but they do come with problems. Although dialysis and transplantation are life-saving, in dialysis patients, a lot of patients do mention the reduced quality of life. And we know that there's a major complications in many patients with heart disease and other vascular problems. And the cost of dialysis is very, very expensive, and it's a major health burden for anywhere in the world. And transplantation is a very good treatment, but they are limited by the organ availability. And a small proportion of patients do lose the kidney through rejection, and the immunosuppressive medication do have complication on their own right. Next, please. And one of the challenge of diabetic kidney disease in the real life situation is that there's a lot of hidden unmet need of the patient. In a way, the unmet needs are created by ourselves, because when we care for patients, quite often we apply the similar clinical approach to a wide range of patients with diabetes and kidney impairment. In reality, all the patients are not the same. They have different clinical risk factor, genetic background, even the rate of progression of disease is quite different. And now we realize even more, the multimorbidity is something we need to learn better on an individual basis. And when we give the same therapeutic approach to patients, there's a wide range of responses in the patient. Some of them stabilize very well, while others continue to have progression. So we really need to provide better clinical care of the patient by understanding the patient better according to clinical phenotypes. And in fact, we started one of these studies in our renal clinic in Hammersmith Hospital, and we look at more than 200 patients and with 30 different clinical phenotypes. That confirmed our clinical impression that, in fact, the combination of multimorbidity is quite different in different patients with diabetic kidney disease. But one lesson we learned is that in hospital care, we are limited by our referral pattern we receive. And as a result, for a small sample size we have, they are not truly representing what happens in the community or in general practice setting. Next, please. And learning from these limitations, I've started this collaboration with Discover Now, and which is very exciting. I'm learning something new every day. And what we have done is that we want to study clinical phenotype of patients with diabetic kidney disease in the whole Northwest London population, not limited by the referral patterns. We focus on the demographic factors, clinical features, which are relevant to the progression of kidney disease and multimorbidity. Among them, vascular complications is a key one. And particularly, we want to make sure that the factors we're analyzing are those commonly available in general practice. The data extraction is ongoing in this retrospective study on the 2.6 million population. We hope that to validate and also refine our original mathematical model from the study in our clinic. And one of the good things about collaboration with Discover Now is that I have managed to expose to wider collaboration with the industry on joint work on diabetic complications. And also during the COVID time, I also joined in a collaboration study looking at how COVID-19 impact on patients' outcome, and with the Imperial College Dr. Foster unit. Next, please. Now, from the work ongoing now, we hope that the results would be a good application to a few important areas. First of all, we hope that we can generate a prognostic model which is useful for all clinicians, including general practitioners, because they are the actual frontline healthcare workers spotting the early presentation of the problem. And on an individual basis, we hope that the better understanding of this clinical risk factor would help the patient to choose the appropriate therapy for the personal patient care, rather than what's that one size fits all. The other lesson that some speakers have been mentioning briefly earlier on is that the integration of patient care is very important in NHS and also worldwide. So hope that we can integrate what's in the community, general practice, and hospital in terms of follow-up management of the patients. And also the other speaker earlier on mentioned about clinical trial. In fact, this is part of my area of work as well, developing new treatment for patients. One lesson that we have learned over the years is that clinical trial is far from simple. Quite often, we try to test a new treatment on a wide range of patients without regarding are they the appropriate subset of patients who need the new treatment. Do they have the clinical risk factor that we should carry out this clinical trial on? So we hope that by using Discover Now collaboration, we can find patients who will have the true unmet medical needs that will give a better chance that the right treatment is developed for the right patient. Now, as we have been working on this, other colleagues in my hospital also get interested about the work, and we have developed academic collaboration with liver team, because liver fibrosis is also one of the known problems in patients with diabetic disease. And so we're going to explore that further. And one of my junior colleagues also interested in the enormous problem about pregnancy complication in patients with diabetes or chronic kidney disease, not to mention the combination of both. And we know that the data set we're going to generate will be quite a comprehensive one. So we're going to work with our colleagues in artificial intelligence in Imperial College to generate a modern prognostic model to have a better understanding how we can use the granular data to develop a new system for patient care. Now, we know that this population study can be integrated with science. So based on the new model, we hope that we can collaborate with UK Biobank and also clinical studies in our clinic to look at the genetics and gene expression on the patient samples. Next. Thank you. So I hope that I give you a snapshot of the work in progress so far. I'm looking forward to further discussion.
Thanks so much. And yeah, another brilliant example of how the data is starting to be used for research. And as Amanda said, we have over 80 requests or projects ongoing, people who want to work with the data. And the last year has been, tremendous in a sort of very strange way, because COVID obviously has accelerated the research questions, and many people are very keen to work with longitudinal linked data on some of those questions as well. So I know Samantha can only be with us until 1 o'clock. So if you have specific questions for her, maybe put them in the chat before she has to leave. I hope Frederick can stay with us until the end of the session. We're now going to hear about how we involve the public, and this is extremely close to our hearts. Ever since care.data, we have been obsessed with how can we create an environment that's trusted enough for people to have the confidence to share their data, not just with other healthcare providers, but also with external partners. And some of them you have heard about today. And we spent a great amount of time and money and resources to hopefully get this right. And Amy Darlington, who is the director at Imperial College Health Partners, has very much been leading this work, and will be talking about it. And then we will hear from some of our patient representatives as well. And you know, it's very timely, because you will have seen the coverage today about attempts to effectively collect GP data. And again, it seems to be the case that we have left out this crucial step to engage the public. So this is why this is so important to us and so close to our hearts. Amy, over to you.
Thanks, Axel. If we can move on to the next slide. Thanks. So as Axel said, we've been working hard to involve patients and the public in our work, and we've done that across the spectrum, which is on your screen at the moment, and I'll talk about each of these steps in more detail. But I think kind of a key theme of also our approach to patient and public involvement is working with partners. So you'll hear through this short presentation a number of call outs to other programs and other organisations who have similar values and ambitions to involve patients and the public in a meaningful way, and how we're collaborating with them on this journey to avoid duplication, but also strengthen the value of our work as well. So as Axel introduced this session, patient and public involvement and engagement has really been at the heart of Discover Now, even before we were Discover Now, and it was a key part of our application to become a hub, because it is hugely important, and there have been significant programs in the past where mistakes have been made, I think it's fair to say, or there have been missed opportunities to involve the public in a meaningful way in how we use their data, and to really understand what their expectations are of how we should be doing that in a way that is trustworthy and has their confidence. And so this really has been at the heart of everything that we've tried to be doing, and has really been embedded across the hub's work. And public trust really is a key element, but isn't the only element. And so I'll come on to talk a bit more about how we've been building trusted policy. But first, I'll talk a bit more around how we start really with the individuals. So our approach to patient and public involvement at Discover Now is really about from person to population, and how can we involve and engage people in a meaningful way across this spectrum. So we want to empower individuals to get more involved in research, and you heard in Amanda's presentation the work that we've been doing around developing a health research register where people can consent to be contacted about research opportunities that may be relevant to them, and putting the control and the power in their hands to take a more proactive approach to how they support and get involved in research. And obviously that means going out and engaging with the community to tell them more about these opportunities. And Maria and her team, who have been leading this work, have been doing a great job over the last few years of getting out into Northwest London through community events, through outpatient clinics, through lots of different opportunities and channels to really talk to people about research and how they can get more involved. And what that's led to is thousands of Northwest Londoners joining up to be a part of our Northwest London research register. And that's not only empowering individuals to be more involved in research, but actually it's also helping the research community. It's significantly speeding up the time that it's taking for participants to be recruited into trials with a much greater conversion rate from consent to trial recruitment. We've also been doing a lot of work around how we can involve people with lived experience. So you've heard about some of the great projects that Discover Now has been involved in, and what we're trying to do more and more is involve people with lived experience in those projects to really help those who are leading the projects to understand what that means for patients with those particular conditions. So an example of this is some of the work that we've been doing around diabetes and the development of a diabetes risk prediction tool through involving people with diabetes who are living with that condition and managing that condition day in, day out. We were able to develop a tool that met their needs, that worked for them, that was accessible for them. And actually, as a result of that involvement, the tool ended up looking quite different and feeling quite different, but actually had significant uptake as a result. And we want to do more of that over the coming year or so. We've also been working with, in partnership with medical charities. You've heard about some of the diverse ranges of research projects that we are supporting. And actually, one key element of how we try to support some of that research work is not just through access to the data, but actually how can we provide access to patients and communities that have been living with some of those conditions to help shape what some of those research questions might look like, and to help kind of validate and share some of the outcomes as a result. And so a way that we've been doing that is connecting with research charities to work with researchers and to help them kind of gain access to some of those patients with experience. And something that we're currently exploring is how we formalise a collaboration with the Association of Medical Research Charities to really help strengthen some of the work that we've been doing in that space. We've also been working in partnership with others. So I can see that Samira Ben-Omar is on the call, who heads up engagement in North West London for the collaboration of CCGs. We have been working with Samira and team to develop and engage community leaders and champions across a whole range of work programmes, and in particular working with seldom heard and diverse communities to understand what their research needs and priorities are, and working in partnership as well with our network data lab and our partners in the Institute of Global Health Innovation. And this is particularly important in North West London because we have a very diverse and diverse population. And actually, it's really therefore important that we have diversity of voice and involvement in the work that we're doing and how we're shaping that work going forward. Which then takes me on to the work that we've been doing with deliberation. And this really is taking a population approach to involvement and engagement, and talks to some of the points that Axel was making in his introduction. We are really keen and very passionate about making sure that the policies that underpin our data use are in line with public expectations and have their trust and their confidence. And the way that we have been aiming to do that is have a very different type of conversation with our populations through the method of deliberation. I'm sure some of you on the call today have heard about things like citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies, effectively all different types of deliberation. And in short, what that does is bring mini publics together that are reflective of a larger population. And through sharing information and helping to educate those participants into some of the complexities of the topics that we're talking about, in this case, how we use data for research, inviting them to grapple with some of the constraints that as decision makers and policy makers we are facing, actually to understand and support them to explore some of the trade-offs and the benefits and concerns and what matters most to them and how they weigh up those trade-offs, importantly, in the context of constraints. What that's enabled us to do is really understand what people's expectations are, but in a quite specific and granular way. And too often, I think in engagement, we can end up with wish lists for decision makers that aren't feasible to implement. And what deliberation aims to do is really generate considered thoughts that are really helpful to policymakers because they come in the context of what is feasible and they've taken those constraints into consideration. So our work in this space started a few years ago with the One London programme, LICRA programme across the capital. And from that large-scale deliberation with 100 people, which has directly impacted a lot of our policies, we've also now developed a citizens advisory group, which has come together over the last few months in a series of mini deliberations to explore some particular dilemmas and questions facing the hub around data access and safeguards and controls, but also around how we realise and disseminate some of the value of data that can be realised through our hub's work, particularly thinking around commercial arrangements and how that might shape our commercial policies going forward. The group of 40 North West Londoners have worked extremely hard with us over the last few months to explore some really tricky dilemmas, actually, and as a result have made some fantastic recommendations to the hub, which are now being taken forward by not only the hub but also North West London sector as a whole. So it's been a great programme to be involved in, and we're continuing to build on the PPIE work that we've done over the last year moving forward. But I think probably enough from me now, Axel, but I'd really like to hand over to Barry Newton, who is one of our citizen partners. He's a member of our Discover Now Hub board. He's been really involved in the patient and public involvement work that we've done, particularly the development of the Citizens Advisory Group. So I think it would be great to hear some of Barry's reflections.
Thank you, Amy. And Barry, over to you. You have been a great supporter from day one. I think you have even been in the room when we did some mock interviews to even get this hub. So you have seen the entire journey. We're very pleased to have you with us. And Amy, I think there are a few questions for you in the chat.
Thank you very much, Axel. Yes, I'm Barry Newton. You see, I'm billed as the citizen rep. I'm afraid I still think that links me back to the reign of terror in 1789. But I hope in the next few minutes to disabuse you of any feelings of that kind. I want to emphasize how much the PPI engagement is there to facilitate research, not to slow it down or prevent it in any way. Now, my background, I was chair of the Research Ethics Committee at St Mary's Hospital for a while. And as a result of that, I ended up on the steering group of a research project. And something Martin said right at the very beginning today was I was immediately made aware how very difficult it was to get sufficient people who qualified to be involved in the piece of research that I was involved in. And I was delighted to hear Martin emphasize that. Now, one thing that the current pandemic has done is it has highlighted in capital letters the huge amount of affection, admiration, and love that the British public has for the NHS. And until recently, there weren't very many ways in which they could express this admiration in offering help. And then, of course, along comes the pandemic, and dozens, if not hundreds of people were needed to test the vaccines before they were used, and people flocked to the standard. So it shows there is a great desire among the British public, sorry, it sounds like a cliche, but to give something back to the NHS. And there wasn't really very much we could do. I mean, we could go, if we had a medical condition, we could go along to the medical school and let final year medics do their practical exams on us. Or failing that, we could give our body to medical research after we'd gone. And that was about it. But now that Imperial and Discover Now have got up and running to this very, very large extent, there is a huge opportunity for members of the public to take part in research. And you've heard Amy mention already that we started with a One London group of 100 people, very carefully chosen to represent all age groups, demographics, sex groups, and everything. It was a wonderfully diverse group to talk about the NHS and the use of data in the NHS. And then that, more recently, has evolved into a citizens' advice group where there were 40 people who, again, Amy mentioned, have worked very, very hard over 4 very long sessions talking about their feelings about data. And there were 1 or 2 particular points that they made. It was borne in upon them very, very firmly that data is very precious, because without it, the academics and the clinicians who want to make things better for us, the patients, would have a much more difficult task. So we are playing a vital role in medical research and ultimately in keeping ourselves and those we love and everybody else healthy. And so the discussion about the data, there were priorities in the discussion, and these priorities already been passed on to the hub. And the priorities were the cost of the data, how the data was used, and most importantly, in capital letters, access to the data and its confidentiality. Those were the things that worried most of the people who were in those groups. Discover Now has got a data access group. I'm one of the co-chairs. I'm the lay co-chair, and there is a what you might loosely call a scientific co-chair as well. And the group is made up of data specialists and clinicians, and two members at the moment of the public, myself and one other. And all applications to use the WYSIC data comes to us. We have spent a great deal of time producing an application form, which we hope is reasonably easy to navigate, and on which all the details that we feel we need to know can be included. The role of the data experts is to make sure that granting access to this data would not cause any breaches, any lack of confidentiality, or that kind of thing. And the two members, the two PPIE members like me, we're there to be reassured on those lines that the access is secure. We're there to have a look at who is getting access to the data, and we're there to have a look at the projects. Do we think that the suggested project is a useful way to use this data? Will it benefit, well, basically the bottom line, will it benefit me or somebody I know if they have health issues in the future? A great deal of the results, a great many of the results of the two public debates have gone back to the hub already. They are very aware of how eager the public is to be involved, and B, how firm the public is in believing that they have the right to have a say in how the data is used. Amy has mentioned how useful the public involvement has been, and I, as somebody who's involved on the front line, as it were, can only emphasize that as heavily as I can. Discover Now would not be as much use to the scientific and the medical and the academic public if it didn't have a great wodge of PPIE involvement, because we gave our data, we value our data, we want you to value our data, and we have some say in how our data is used. And it is a wonderful and a painless way for the public to be involved in healthcare. I think that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Barry, and incredibly helpful to have you as always and have your voice. And I think Katie has posted a link to all the material of the Citizens Summit that we held almost 18 months ago, just before COVID hit, actually in person in London over several weekends. And if you're interested in this space, and if you want some powerful stories and be part of that discussion, and then have a look at the videos, which are all up, and so is all the material. It's been one of the most humbling professional experiences that certainly I have been part of, and maybe that's also why we're so anxious that you know, it's not just about one hub doing the right thing, it's about everyone doing the right thing, because it doesn't take an awful lot to destroy the trust that we have built so carefully, and you know, that's partly why we're so passionate about this. Right, so these were all the presentations, so many thanks to all the presenters. Hopefully this has given you an overview of what can be done with the data, ranging from industry to research, to public involvement, and very much what Barry said, it's also, you know, how patients get involved. And one goal of the hub has been from the beginning that patients can also feed in other data sets. For example, the use of their smartphones. There's quite a lot of interesting health-related data that you know, if linked up with electronic healthcare records, actually could be quite powerful. So it's not just patients donating data, but potentially also patients getting value in data back out of this over time. So we have now a bit of time to reflect and answer questions. You have the presenters still with us. I think Barry has to go in 3 minutes, but I know we have John Norton with us, who's another patient who has been on this journey with us. So it's over to you, and I know there are a few questions in the chat, which hopefully we can answer in slow time. I should also say we have a few other colleagues who have been instrumental in building the hub with us. I see Kavitha is with us from the North West London data team, and I'm sure there are others on the call as well. So fire away if you have any specific questions. But maybe I kick off with one to particularly Ross, actually. You know, in many ways we have talked about all the great things that have gone so fantastically well, right? But you know, in the spirit of sort of being a developing hub, there's obviously always more that needs to be done. There's always more that we could do, and not everything is absolutely perfect. Ross, from your sort of perspective, from the industry perspective, what is on your wish list? You know, that we should focus on going forward? What would make this even better than it is at this stage? And please be, you know, as honest as you want to, because this is very much about the learning as it is about sort of presenting back what has been achieved.
Yeah, you're right. There's, you know, we're all on a journey of learning in this work, and particularly pathway transformation and innovation type work is kind of about, you know, trying new things, and it's often uncomfortable, and we follow methodologies and so on, and we set out with best intentions, and we learn a lot along the way, and we have to adapt. So, you know, I think there are a few areas, I suppose. I guess one would be, you know, about Discover Now is playing a very clear role as a hub for real world evidence using real world data, and, you know, traditionally seen as a research environment. And I think whilst what we do is research in and of itself, you know, we are engaged in pathway transformation in kind of originating sort of solutions, I suppose, and testing them to see if they work, and the data obviously enables us to do that. And I think this is kind of a new area as a sort of proposition for Discover Now, and I think there's a tendency in the system to sort of see academic health science networks sometimes as just research environments as opposed to sorts of agents of change. So I think there's something around that in terms of Discover Now's ambition to sort of how far it wants to sort of focus in this area in terms of, I guess, enabling practice change in direct care beyond research in and of itself. And then I guess linked to that is, how we kind of engage from the beginning around sort of integrated care and work together as industry providers and Discover Now AHSNs to kind of engage with primary and secondary care in you know, our new integrated service environment to ensure that you know, we're looking all the way through pathways of patients from start to finish, and kind of working in collaboration together, not just as AstraZeneca and a particular part of the NHS, but that real role that academic health science networks can play in using data to enable and affect positive change in the system, which will result in patient outcomes and improvements in clinical practice. I think I think that's probably one of the main reflections, really. I mean, about the I guess it's sort of people's preconceived ideas on viewing research environments as not being pragmatic enablers of change.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, that's fantastically well put, and in many ways, the sort of beauty of Discover Now, it's co-located within a real health economy, right? And like you, I'm really curious and excited about these partnerships that go beyond a sort of transactional, here's a bit of data, go off and do your research, towards that something that is much more grounded in, we want to achieve change on the ground. We need data inputs, but we also need expertise from other partners, whether that's industry, patients, or the voluntary sector. How can we bring our sort of collective tools together to achieve that change? And that's obviously what Imperial College Health Partners is about more broadly, right? And in that sense, we're very privileged and fortunate to have this data asset within our family, because it enables us actually to do the other day job, which is actually to drive transformation and better healthcare through innovation in a much better way. So I absolutely echo that. But it's a journey, right? And I think we're all finding out what these new relationships look like that are not necessarily transactional. That is probably the most exciting space at the moment. I'm not seeing any, so there's a little hand sign. If you haven't, I'm sure you're all familiar with Zoom. There's a little raise hand thing on the participants list. So if you wanted to ask a question, please raise your hand and I'll bring you in. I'm not seeing any at the moment. Kavitha, maybe I can turn to you just very briefly. And I mean, you're living this kind of tension between sort of having to cater for the NHS every day needs and demands, as well as thinking ahead and kind of building for the future and looking outwards. How do you look at this hub, and what's in there for you? Being much more connected to the everyday sort of NHS machinery.
Thank you, Axel. It's been an absolute delight to hear some of the speakers. Really puts it into life. Everything we do on a day-to-day basis. Very, really good point, Axel. So I think what we, do within Northwest London, we've got to be committed to bring research into the fold in a day-to-day practice. Don't keep research as something, separate. Research is fundamental to how we run the, integrated care system, both, clinical practice as well as the operational, running of the NHS as a whole, whether it's demand and supply modeling or everything is folded in that kind of an analysis in my mind. So what I think we will have to do as we set ourselves up as an integrated care system, think through the governance and bring the research governance within the ICS framework, so that everybody knows. I know Paul put that in the chat as to how many people and the trust knows Discover Now. So we want everybody to know this. We don't want to be spending ages trying to keep talking about this system when it's a sector-wide asset. So everybody should know this. Everybody should know what it's capable of, and what can we do to bring it in the fold is really where we have got to focus our energy. The other thing I'll say is alignment. So especially with the data curation, if we want to, we already have a great asset. We've got the, data. We've linked, health and social care data. If you need to bring new data in, what would that, set of data be? And how can we make sure that, whatever we bring brings benefit to clinical, operational, and research? So everybody should see a benefit in that. So that's the other thing to think through. And as part of that, I know Kevin Gerald, who's our CIO, and Sanjay Gautama, who's our CCIO, couldn't join the meeting today. But we have been putting our heads together to think through the governance that we have to follow around data and analytics across the ICS, and we are absolutely committed to bring research into the fold. And Discover Now, should be known and will be the, sort of gateway to research. And you can represent, the hub can represent whatever the interest of researchers are, bring it into the mix so we can have like a holistic conversation.
Thank you, Kavitha. That's really helpful. John Norton, you have your hand up. Do you want to come in?
I don't have a question, but I wonder if from a patient point of view, I might make a short comment of what I've experienced, particularly during today. Just 2 quick points.
Go for it, John.
I think that 2 things particularly struck me as regards the increasing value of the database that we have are curating and are the guardians of. And one was in the talk on bariatric surgery and SMI, serious mental condition, where it is so important to have, I think what you call a longitudinal, I call it a long-term data reach, so that you have the person's history from way back in at the GP level, at the primary care level, at the secondary care level, and you know so much more about a person than you would normally have. That impressed me as being enormously valuable. And the other was for Fred Tam in his chronic kidney disease, and in particular diabetic kidney disease. I perhaps am attracted to kidneys because I lost one rather more than 20 years ago due to cancer, but I survived, as he will know, extraordinarily well on one probably enlarged kidney, which I look after, but I do give it some libations of wine from time to time to keep it happy. But what impressed me there was that, as well as knowing about the patient's kidney, you need to know so much more else about the patient, their genetic history, other multimorbidities, I made a note of this, their demographic, etc., etc. So again, that data is not easy to find unless you have a really extensive and comprehensive database. Those, Axel, were just 2 things that particularly struck me from my aspect, which is looking at this from the personal, public, and patient viewpoint. And I'm very impressed indeed with everything I've heard this morning.
Thanks, John. And I think you're raising a really interesting point because, and Frederick, you might want to come in on this very briefly. Obviously, what we have talked about today is the power of research that can be done on the data that we have. But Frederick, you're doing your research because eventually you want to impact, your clinical practice. Because if you know that all these other factors are important for, John's kidney, then if you're in your clinic, you want to know this stuff at sort of, touch of a button in many ways. And this is the word that Kavitha was referring to some extent as well, is how can we then, not just have this in an anonymized way, which we have for research purposes, but in an identifiable way, so that you as a clinician, have all this data available once you know that these factors are important.
Yeah, excellent. I like your comment very much. I remember many years ago, people asked me, why do I choose kidney medicine as my medical practice? It's one of the specialty that involve a lot of medical scientific data to care for a patient. But in reality, when we see individual patients, we want to know everything, ranging from social background as well as demographic, to provide the right care for patients. Otherwise, what we end up with a patient that we see regularly in the clinic, they may feel equally miserable whatever we do for them, unless we understand more about their background. And this is very important because in other studies, we can see that there's a major issue about mental health. And mental health doesn't mean illness, but mental health does mean that we got to pay attention to what other setting to make sure that at the end of the day, we get a well patient or well supported patient, even when they're going through hurdles.
Yeah, thank you. And, in many ways, some of the other projects that are ongoing, I think someone mentioned, I think Amy mentioned, like around the One London, those are attempt to actually link up, identifiable data, so that at the point of care, Frederick and others have that, broader information. And I suspect over time that there will be an awful lot more than just the clinical history in those notes. So look, we're nearly out of time. I don't see any other hands. You know where to find us. You have our hopefully our email address, and if you don't, then it can be easily found on the web. I'm not attempting to obviously summarize all these presentations, but I think there is a theme that sort of connects all of this, and that is partnership and collaboration, right? None of this is possible in isolation. We couldn't have done this just as the NHS, or we couldn't have just done this as ICHP. We needed that collaboration with others, and obviously, HDR UK has been fantastically generous in funding these hubs, and we're tremendously grateful. But obviously, there's connectivity across these different hubs. There's connectivity with industry and other external partners. We briefly spoke about that is an area that needs further development and creative thinking, and there is quite a lot of that happening, and hopefully we move away over time from a sort of transactional, sometimes confrontational and slightly unhelpful relationship between the public sector and the private sector, because there's an awful lot that actually both sides can benefit beyond the kind of transactional elements. We talked a lot about the partnership with the public, and I think we have taken it to a different level. There's often a sort of tokenistic patient that sits on a board, that is helpful, but that in my view doesn't go far enough. And I think we have sort of pushed it into the next space. There's probably further that we can go. And then there's obviously nothing if people are not using this data. So the research community that's now starting to use the data is not just consuming data, but it's also improving the data by using it. And so there is a beneficial cycle that's emerging, that hopefully over time will make this data bigger and also better in terms of the quality. So partnerships are really, really important for all of this, and that should be the spirit with which we sort of go into the next 18 months, as Amanda has set it out. So I just want to thank colleagues on the call, including HDR UK, for all the support. This is never easy. The last 12 months have changed direction for us, as you would expect. Funders have been tremendously flexible, and colleagues have been very flexible to accept that a change from the original plan was necessary given COVID, and I suspect the next 18 months are not going to be any different from that, and we will discover many more interesting and new things, and who knows where we can take it to. And then just a big thank you for everyone who has dialed in and listened to us. As I say, if you want to work with us, or if you have further questions, then please get in touch, and we're more than happy to sit down with you and explore either your needs or your concerns or questions. Thank you very much, and have a brilliant day. Thanks to all our speakers.